You are nothing at all. Mary, the recently hired manager, laughed and said, I'm taking your pay. My salary? Yes, that is what I am expressing. I ought to collect the unemployed workers' salaries. That makes it more meaningful. I have to provide for my wife and kids. I can put up with her losing her mind at work, but not getting paid is another matter together. Since I graduated, I have been employed by this company, and I have had nothing but kindness from the president. I wanted to stay here and work, but I can't put up with a boss that is so controlling that he is threatening to withhold my pay. If so, I'm quitting. I'm grateful for everything you've done so far. Oh, so you're giving up? We saved the income we would have given you, so that's ideal. The staff members who were seeing the conversation between Manager Mary and myself were agitated. They must have concerned what my departure would mean for the project. Nevertheless, Manager Mary mentioned something improper for a manager, not knowing my position. I could no longer remain at this company in order to safeguard my family. I'm Will Miller, and I'm 43. At Thomas Info, an aid company, I am a salaryman. This is a local small-scale aid company that develops systems. We occasionally have to deal with irrational expectations from the principal contractor because we also take on subcontracting jobs. Although we used to work extra until 10 p.m. 10 years ago, the work style improvements implemented recently have made it less unpleasant than it was in the past. I work for Thomas Info in a certain capacity. Although I'm not heavily involved in the development process itself, it's a very significant function. I frequently work outside the office to complete my duties. As a result, there were times when I worked remotely from the workplace. After the former manager retired, a new manager was assigned to Thomas Info's development department one day. I was curious as to who would be selected, and it turned out to be Mary Wilson, a stranger from outside the organization. It appeared like she was in her late 30s. I'll be the development manager starting today. Wilson, Mary. It's good to meet you. Try not to cause too much difficulty for me, even though I'm sure you're all incompetent. When the staff heard this haughty greeting, they knew that someone unpleasant had arrived. I was concerned about how the development department would react to having someone of that caliber in charge. Who is that person? A woman whispered to me from nearby. She is Nancy Smith, a woman in her 30s who works in the same development department as me. Well, is she famous in the industry, or did she get the job through family connections? Manager Mary appears to be the president's niece based on what I later learned. She is the daughter of Thomas Info's president's sister. We nodded, assuming that her contacts helped her land the job. Although it was a somewhat last-minute appointment, these kinds of relationships are crucial in business management. With that in mind, I decided that Manager Mary's promotion was unavoidable. If there had been no issues afterwards, it would have been oked, but when Manager Mary took over, chaos broke out in the development department. As it happens, Mary knew very little about system development. As a result, there was confusion on the ground due to her inconsistent and off-target directions. But Manager Mary, if we do it as you say, the system won't work. Silence yourself. Are you implying that you are unable to obey my commands? To obey Manager Mary would be to put a stop to the development process. However, she became furious when I gave her advice. Naturally, her wrongdoings didn't end there. She attempted to work impulsively. However, if the task is abruptly increased, we won't be able to finish it. Why isn't this done yet? But you just told us yesterday, so it's very. She takes her work very lightly. She arrives in the department just prior to the start time and promptly departs after causing havoc. She doesn't seem to care that all of the staff is having trouble keeping up with the additional work that she has caused. If this keeps happening, the project will fail and the staff's irritation will blow up. I talked to her since I was experiencing this issue. Manager Mary, what? I called out, and Manager Mary gave me a frustrated expression. She then looked down on me with a sneer. It's the ineffective man who rarely appears, which is who I was wondering who it was. Are you blind to the problems the department is facing? Admittedly, I only visit the office roughly 3 times a week. But it's clear that Manager Mary is to blame for the misunderstanding in the development department. She should be working more hours if things appear difficult rather than just informing others. I swallowed my need to retaliate and gave my counsel in the most courteous way I could. Are you having any difficulties carrying out your managerial responsibilities? I'm here to help if that's all right. How conceited. I suppose I am the manager. Nothing is beyond my understanding. Does she not see the urgency, or does she not take ownership of the department's chaos? Manager Mary is unaware that if things keep on this way, the project will fail. Convinced that whispers would be ineffective, I chose to say it straight. I regret to inform you that a large number of staff members are not happy with your current management. The project's advancement has also gone well behind schedule. How come? Manager Mary's thickly makeup wrinkled up in annoyance. Despite feeling intimidated, I continued. It won't be long until the workers' resentment blows up. The project will fail, and the company's reputation will suffer if this goes on. Would you kindly consider our recommendations for the best course of action? The workers in our immediate vicinity listened carefully as I sincerely shared my recommendations in the hopes that things would become better at work, if only somewhat. They have to have anticipated a shift. But she was being so arrogant that she was not going to take my advice. Are you leaving some hostess club since you don't show up too often? Guys who are unpopular are very boring. That's not it at all. I scowled, perplexed as to why she was unable to comprehend. Instead, despite the fact that I barely visit the office roughly 3 times a week, I was being accused of not working. On the other days, I labor outside with diligence. These are all things that only I am capable of doing. Despite having recently taken on the role of manager, it appears that she is unaware of my outside activities. She should normally ask or review the documentation to find out, but she doesn't appear to be interested. Because she is the niece of the president, I could understand that she became a manager overnight. But that's another issue if she intends to cause this much disruption to the development site. You are nothing at all. She laughed and added, I'm taking your pay. My salary. Yes, that is what I am expressing. I ought to collect the unemployed workers' salaries. That makes it more meaningful. That's a bit too much. What? Is there something wrong with that? We should never pay workers who are not productive. I have to provide for my wife and kids. I can put up with her losing her mind at work, but not getting paid is another matter altogether. Since I graduated, I have been employed by this company, and I have had nothing but kindness from the president. I wanted to stay here, but I can't put up with a boss that is so oppressive that he is threatening to withhold my pay. I resign in such scenario. I'm grateful for everything you've done so far. Oh, so you're giving up? That's ideal, since we were able to save the money we would have given you. Manager Mary grinned and giggled. I'm not terrified of her now that I've made the decision to give up. Do I need to do a handover? Obviously not. There is nothing to turn over because you haven't been working on anything. Comprehensive. Farewell. The workers were yelling at each other as they watched my conversation with Management Mary. They must have concerned what my leaving would mean for the project. Nevertheless, Manager Mary mentioned something improper for a manager, not knowing my position. I could no longer remain at this company in order to safeguard my family. I made the decision to step down and turned in my resignation. I told my wife about the circumstances as well. She agreed with my decision because she had heard me whine about Manager Mary and thought it was a huge problem that I wasn't getting paid. I got it. Why don't you take a little break now that you have the opportunity? Retirement may be the following period in which you are unemployed. Yes, you are correct. The kids won't understand why I'm home all the time if I don't tell them about my resignation. Our finances are sufficient, but in order to provide for my family, I must start a new work right away. My phone kept ringing the next day. I looked at the caller ID and saw that it was the president. I was able to surmise what it was about, but as I had already tendered my resignation, I saw no reason to respond and chose to ignore it. Manager Mary called me as well later on, but it was she who essentially drove me away. Now, what on earth could she want from me? That thinking kept me from answering the calls. The calls from Manager Mary and the president continued for a few more days. But all of a sudden, Nancy called me. I had a good working relationship with her. Perhaps Mary, the manager, or the president asked her to convince me. Still, I chose to take the call since I was curious about the circumstances. Hello, Nancy. How are you doing? Hello. How is business at the company doing? Are you genuinely curious? It's completely disorganized. She grinned bitterly and replied, Well, it's the president's and manager Mary's fault for allowing her behavior. Nancy most likely understood why I resigned because she had witnessed me fighting with Manager Mary. You were doing far more significant work than programming, but Manager Mary was unaware that you were also the project manager. You are useless, she remarked. That's unbelievable. I oversaw the company's ongoing projects in my capacity as a project manager. Although I didn't spend a lot of time in the office, I managed important duties including customer negotiations and progress reporting to make sure projects got done on time. In addition, I negotiated the rights for the programs incorporated into the systems, looked for temporary help when things were moving slowly, and generally handled anything that couldn't be done internally. After realizing you were the project manager, Manager Mary tried to take over your work, but she has so little knowledge of system development that the clients are demanding a different person in charge. That makes sense. The timetable is constantly being jumbled by Manager Mary's arbitrary work additions. We are not sure if we are fulfilling the needs of the client or if the development rights are safe. The accuracy of what we're doing is unknown. We're working so hard, but we have no idea why despite the amount of tasks. It is a bad dream. One might easily envision Manager Mary causing chaos in the development division. I'm sorry for the surviving staff members and customers, but Manager Mary is solely to blame. They ought to address their grievances with her. In addition, she began shifting the responsibility of being the project manager onto other staff members after realizing she couldn't do it. However, how may project management responsibilities be managed by local staff? That's what Manager Mary usually does. I scowled and smiled bitterly. She shouts at people and puts chores on them since she doesn't know how to work. It's a typical poor boss strategy. President Thomas finally called you because he could take it no longer. She is his niece, but he probably wasn't able to defend her anymore. He must have been phoning a lot because he wanted you to return. Thomas Info's president is President Thomas. He was obviously quite desperate because of how often he called. Mary, the manager, also gave a call. She was attempting to assign blame for the mayhem to you, or President Thomas had instructed her to. Have you responded? No, I didn't. It's probably best that way. It would not be ideal for you to handle any irrational charges. As I had already quit and had been informed that there was no need for a handover, I am no longer in charge of the development department. Making contact with them could make matters more difficult. Then I asked Nancy a question I had been considering. Nancy, are you okay? Oh, I'm not at all right. You didn't hear anything offensive. She talked for a long time, but I was so tired of hearing it that I returned it to her. Nancy is a strong-willed woman, so even the male staff finds it difficult to oppose her. Apparently, she also had arguments with Manager Mary. It took place in the tumultuous development department this morning. Supervisor Mary chastised Nancy. Don't act like it's none of your business, you worthless moron. Take action without using a project manager. We are unable to proceed unless you establish a schedule. We work as employees. Decide on your own course of action. I'll seize your pay if you're not even able to accomplish that. Nancy said, Feel free, but if you do, I'll take my pay stub to the labor board at that. Manager Mary struggled to find words. She understood that getting reported to the labor board would be a major issue. Then, Nancy was attempted to take on more job by manager Mary. Take care of this inquiry. I'm not responsible for this, and I have no idea how to solve it. Nancy answered coolly, though, believing it was outside the purview of her position. Manager Mary must have been irritated by Nancy's persistent obstinacy. You never stop complaining. Being an inept woman is difficult, isn't it? Stated Manager Mary. The other guys just decide to go ahead and do it without hesitation. I don't think it looks that way. That's what we would call harassment, isn't it? Nancy shot back, a not-so-cute woman acting all high and mighty. Thinking more deeply, it was a waste of time to argue. Manager Mary said as she was leaving. Nancy succeeded in chasing Manager Mary off. I grinned as I listened to her story. You're strong, Riley, being in a position to say that much. Actually, all I did was voice what had to be stated. It's uncommon for her to be allowed to voice her opinions at this company. Manager Mary was forced to concede for this reason. Are you returning to the company? I'm thinking about it. Really? It's difficult to let go after almost 20 years of employment at this organization, starting when I was a recent graduate. I would feel more confident returning to Thomas Info if the working environment is restored than looking for another position. I would be delighted if you returned. So, what's stopping you? It's Mary, the manager. It's clear that Manager Mary is the reason I don't want to go back. She'll keep up her antics in the development division. I had no desire to tidy up her spills. Nancy then said something in a semi-satisfied tone. I believe she may eventually resign. Why do you feel that way? She is the niece of the president. She won't be released so lightly, in my opinion. Well, later on, I heard something. President Thomas gave me another call. I used to ignore the call since I didn't want to get into any difficulty, but after learning certain details from Nancy, I chose to pick up and pay attention. I sincerely apologize, Will. I never thought my niece would act in such a horrible way. What is the company's present state of affairs? It's a total disarray. The clients are quite irate because the project isn't moving forward at all. The workers claim they are unable to continue working for such a corporation. President Thomas let out a long sigh. I'm making a valiant effort to reassure the staff members who are ready to turn in their resignation letters. This is pretty bad, and if it keeps up, our business will actually fail. Resignation letters must be accepted by the company if they are presented. But if they take that action right now, the business will cease to exist. He's requesting that the staff hold off a little bit longer. It resembles trying to stop an impending dam breach. After that, I had a question that had been on my mind. What initially drew Manager Mary to Thomas Info? Well, even among our relatives, we've always had problems with her. Really? I had never before heard that President Thomas had appointed her as a manager out of the blue just because she was related to him. I had assumed that to be the case, but the situation didn't appear to fit. The sole daughter of my sister is Manager Mary. My sister is a secretary at a logistics company where she married Mary, the president. Being the only daughter of the president, Mary was spoilt, and that's what happened. By no means was he putting up with Manager Mary's egotistical actions. I was a little relieved to know how he really felt. Even so, I was somewhat aback to discover that Manager Mary was the president of a different company's daughter. Her conceited attitude seemed more understandable after learning this. She nonetheless managed to graduate from college in spite of her laziness. She was unable to hold down a job, though, and has since changed employment 6 times. She made multiple attempts at dating but was consistently dumped. Even when her relationships and career didn't go well, her pride kept her out of control. I had no idea she had such a convoluted past before coming to work at Thomas Info. Knowing this, I could see why President Thomas chose to appoint someone with her qualifications. I realized he had his troubles and started to feel a little sorry for him. even though I had suffered because of her. She was initially meant to work for her parents' business, but she grumbled that the logistics were too boring. I was forced to take her in since she insisted on working for a company that paid well. My aim was that it would serve as a springboard for her to engage with society. Though he was her uncle and grudgingly granted his sister's and brother-in-law's request, President Thomas undoubtedly didn't really want to appoint her as manager. He had to know what might happen if he promoted her to manager. But in the hopes that it would ease her transition into society, he recruited Manager Mary. It would appear that she was unimpressed with President Thomas's kindness, but I was done with her after this happened. My sister and brother-in-law agreed that we are no longer obligated to spoil her when I spoke with them. They made an effort to assist her in becoming self-sufficient, but Manager Mary completely ignored them. She was full of pride and never felt guilty, therefore she didn't have any appreciation for her family's support. I spoke with Nancy as well, and there are some unanswered questions. Could you please return? Manager Mary is going to be fired. Is it all right for me to return? Yes, in fact, we are unable to restore order to this place without you. I apologize for the chaos, but now that you're back, maybe the workers who are considering quitting will think twice. Then what about these prerequisites? I gave President Thomas a suggestion after pausing to consider it. He saw the value in it and agreed. It was agreed that I would return to work at Thomas Info. Manager Mary, meanwhile, received word of her termination. I visited the president's office to talk about this issue. Manager Mary was also called in at the same moment. Rather than brushing her off cold, he offered her an opportunity to speak. Perhaps in an attempt to get her to think things through and find a different way to make apologies. This was President Thomas's final act of compassion. Manager Mary scowled as she saw me walk into the room. Why is he here? What language do you speak? Do you understand why this place has summoned you? Obviously. I'm being fired, which is ridiculous. Why? It's not at all ridiculous. It's obvious that you don't know how the development department is doing. Are you able to offer any defense remarks? Here, if she had taken responsibility for her mistakes, there could have been hope. But Manager Mary answered in a frantic manner rather than expressing regret. Why am I being fired when I've done nothing wrong? It's because you didn't do the handover properly. I wasn't going to give in to her anymore, even if it appeared like she was only going to blame me. You claimed that I wasn't working, and that a handover wasn't required, despite my promise to do it. The development department is currently in a terrible state as a result. It aggravates me to think about it even today. You ought to have mentioned that you anticipated the current state of affairs without a handover. You are the one who is negligent here. You always place the blame elsewhere. You are in charge of the Department of Development. You ought to have fully comprehended my effort. Why were you ignorant of this? Supervisor Mary did not know what to say. She was unaware of the responsibility that came with being a manager. She most likely believed that she could simply boss her subordinates around and get paid a lot of money. Relying on someone who has quit is pitiful. Didn't you let me go because you could manage without me? Cease talking. You claim as much, yet I have the right to sue you for damages due to your careless resignation. This mess was caused by the project manager who left without a handover. It should be you who accepts accountability. You threatened to seize my income, so I resigned. Isn't it excessive to expect me to assume ownership of the project while putting me in charge of charitable work? Salary confiscation. What is it? I didn't say it at all. Mary, the manager, abruptly became knave. She had threatened to seize my pay, of course, but it didn't seem right that she would acknowledge it in front of President Thomas. Obviously, she had no power to set wages. President Thomas seems irritated by her actions. I presented her with a proof. Don't act as though you don't know. I have all of your careless comments on tape. What? How do you mean? My defense. You contradict yourself so frequently that it would be useless to debate who said what. Supervisor Mary never accepts accountability for her statements. I could never tell when I could be falsely accused in a place like this. I discreetly recorded our chats on my phone in case I needed to establish my innocence. Supervisor Mary became pallid. A corporation that records conversations? Unbelievable. Normally, I don't record discussions. I've never felt the need to defend myself until after meeting you. I will play your statements right now if you deny it. Stop it. Manager Mary made a valiant attempt to halt me. She did not want President Thomas to hear her haughty comments. There was only one thing she could do if she did not want the recording to play. So do you admit that you said you would confiscate my salary and that a handover wasn't necessary? Manager Mary said, I admit it, looking absolutely defeated and cornered. There was no turning back from her rejection now. In light of this, I proclaimed, Manager Mary will be let go, and I will keep getting the pay you were meant to get until you retire. I've told the president that I'll repair the project you almost wrecked in exchange. What? Remain less shocked. It is reasonable to take your income since you haven't been working. Manager Mary could barely contain her shock upon learning that I would be collecting her pay. She wouldn't have given a damn if all she wanted was for me to get paid more. It was frustrating, though, that I would be receiving the money intended for her. Stop being absurd. Are you stealing from me? That is. It is not your right to refuse. You are no longer employed at Thomas Incorporated. She protested, but I wouldn't have been inspired to finish the assignment she had already completely botched without this arrangement. If it were my duty, that's one thing, but why should I have to repair the damage that Manager Mary caused? Of course, all I would lose out on is my initial pay if the idea fails. That's why I find the scenario to be really motivating. And there's something else I need to tell you. What is it now? It was terrible enough to be fired and have her money seized by someone she detested. What more is possible? Something about her expression said, Nancy. Yes, Nancy came into the president's office at the summons of President Thomas. It seemed that she had been standing by in the corridor the entire time. I hear you found something. Yes, something that meets your expectations. What is it? What topic are you discussing? Manager Mary became alarmed at seeing President Thomas wearing a severe expression and Nancy grinning. I was aware that President Thomas and Nancy were looking into something pertaining to Manager Mary. Perhaps they had made a breakthrough. She was seen snatching a bank book by the surveillance camera around a week ago. Additionally, a $3,000 suspicious withdrawal has occurred. You can't talk your way out of this, Manager Mary. What? Manager Mary made a sloppy attempt at stealing, but she had actually stolen business funds. She had greatly overestimated the circumstances if she had believed she wouldn't be discovered. Whatever? What my sister said turned out to be accurate. What was said by my mother? Something President Thomas said to the agitated Manager Mary, appearing irritated. She added that you were using your parents' money to pay for hosts and purchase designer items that you could flaunt on social media. And you attempted to steal from our business instead of complying with their attempts to stop you. A lie. That is not what I did. Then why did you take our company's money without permission? Manager Mary recoiled at the harsh comments of President Thomas. Nancy applied further pressure after that. Stealing cash to pay for hosts. I hate you as a fellow woman. Cease talking. How much do you know? No one has ever loved a lady like you who isn't even cute. How pathetic. Nancy remarked, You said that before, that I'm not cute, her veins clearly throbbing. Nancy reacted like an adult should have when she was labeled ugly, but she must have been furious on the inside. My spouse and kids are already here. I've heard your narrative, but I'm not interested in insults from a lady who has to pay a lot of money to hosts in order to receive any attention after being dumped by guys. Manager Mary's face flushed deep red at Nancy's words. She was dumbfounded. She had failed as a worker and a woman. As President Thomas noticed Manager Mary was at a loss for words, he spoke. You've lost your job. We'll compile the proof and notify the authorities of your embezzlement. Police? That's not how far you have to go. Long? Embezzlement is a grave offense. An offense. She must have believed that obtaining her substantial sum of money would be simple and risk-free. It's possible that she was unaware that what she did was illegal. But she has to retrain her fundamentals if she views society with such indifference. One cannot pilfer another's money. You have to apologize if you make a mistake. She needs to start over from scratch if she can't even grasp these basic concepts. She's over 40 years old, but she doesn't have common sense. You have to change for the better by taking the appropriate penalty. When manager Mary realized how serious all of her transgressions had become, she broke down in tears. She was accused of embezzlement at work. Mary was taken into custody and questioned. It came to light throughout the investigation that she had also embezzled money from guys she had dated. She was accused of fraud, which made her charges more serious. Given the seriousness of her several offenses, she received a 7-year prison sentence. She argued in court that she wasn't at fault, but naturally, it wasn't accepted. Legally speaking, everything she had done was wrong. Maybe a 7-year sentence will make Mary reconsider how she views society. She will probably be in her late 40s when she is liberated, though. She won't be able to start again easily at that age. Her future appears gloomy, even if she manages to learn common sense today. As stated, I'm still employed at Thomas Info. I will get the salary Mary was scheduled to have till she retired if I can bring the project back to life. This is an amazing promise, and it motivates me much to rework the project. When my wife learned that I had found new work and might even be receiving a sizable pay rise, she was happy. It seemed that our kids were unaware of my temporary resignation. I was a little nervous about saying sorry to the clients, but I did apologize and gave them an update on our future plans. We succeeded in carrying on economic dealings with them. Mary was fired, and the development department got back to normal 2 weeks later. After we were able to extend the project's deadline, things started to move forward again. I'm happy to see you back. The project is safe as of right now. You're exaggerating, but I'll do my best. How much the president expects from me is evident in the contract he signed on my behalf. Making this initiative a success was my promise to live